The first word that comes to mind in Cuba when you mention Gerardo Hernández is hero. That's because he is one due to his labor as a Cuban agent. He infiltrated groups in Miami that conducted many violent actions against the Cuban people with the purpose of destroying the revolution. He was imprisoned for almost 2 decades after a manipulated trial. He's part of the case known as the Cuban Five. He was released in December 17, 2014, after an agreement between the two countries. He's now vice rector at his alma mater, the Higher Education Institute of Foreign Affairs. Thank you so much, Gerardo, for this opportunity of talking to TeleSUR, to its audience in English. Your story is well known, but it's so many years of misinformation, so many years of seeing how this story of the Five was absolutely manipulated. Hardly ever a media in the world, big or small, passed the test of telling the story, the true story of the Cuban Five. I want to go to Manuel Viramontes, a name that you used to have when you lived in the U.S. And one of the biggest questions around your story is, why were you in the United States? Why was it important that a group of Cubans were doing the kind of work that you were doing in the U.S.? Why?
Well, since 1959, the triumph of the revolution, from the U.S. started a series of attacks against Cuba. First, the CIA and other U.S. entities finance, organize, train a group of Cubans to operate inside Cuba and from the U.S. Coming to Cuba. And for many, many years, they were operating with total impunity. For example, they used to come in boats and shoot in the coast to towns, hotels, etc. And the impunity was such that they went back to the U.S., organized a press conference and recognized, we just did this and this and this. And when somebody asked, well, wait a minute, was that violating the Neutrality Act of the U.S.? And they said, no, no, no. Technically, we didn't violate any U.S. law because the law says that we cannot go from the U.S. to any other country to do this kind of things, but we went first to the key in the Bahamas and then from the key to Cuba, so technically it's ridiculous, but that's
an excuse.
Exactly, that's how they did it, and nobody in the U.S. messed with them. Cuba complained for many, many years about that kind of operation that has a human cost. There are hundreds, thousands of victims of terrorism in Cuba, and the U.S. just looked the other side, the other way. So Cuba had no choice but to send a group of people to infiltrate those organizations and send the information to Cuba precisely to prevent those terrorist acts.
Finally, in September 12, 1998, you were caught by a SWAT team. It's known that American authorities offered you and some of your colleagues a deal that would have been comfortable to take, but you did not. What was that deal? Why you didn't take it?
Basically, they wanted us to cooperate with them. And could you imagine in those difficult years of the special period that they would be able to sit in front of the cameras, somebody that was an officer of the Cuban intelligence, and to read whatever script they wanted to say, oh yeah, I know that Cuba has chemical weapons ready to use against the U.S., or I know that Cuba is preparing terrorist acts against the U.S., or I know that Cuba is involved in drugs operations, whatever they wanted us to say. That's what they want, to organize a show against Cuba. And because none of the five cooperated with their plans, that's why we were thrown in solitary confinement, etc. But I believe that the official plan for them was to use us in a show, mediatic show against Cuba.
How to spend 16 years in a prison surrounded by let's say, a very hostile environment. What was the biggest motivation you had to stay there, knowing that you could find a way to go out, although that would have meant to violate your own principles and what you believed in? How to deal with that kind of pressure for so much time?
You know, some people believe that because we were political prisoners, we were set aside or had special considerations. None of that. We share even the cells with all kinds of criminals, killers, drug dealers, etc. And it was difficult, but because we were not trained for that, right? Nobody is trained to
be caught, get caught.
Exactly, and to see somebody getting killed. I remember when all the prisoners realized that I had been in Africa in a war. They were, have you been in a war? And I say, yeah, I was in a war, but I didn't see nobody getting killed. And here in prison, I see many people getting killed in front of me. That is very, very difficult. But when you are conscious that you're not there for in vain, that all the time we have in our conscience that we were not in prison for dealing with drugs, like most of the people there. We were not there for killing somebody. We were for a reason, and that reason was protecting our country against terrorism. And that gives you courage. And I had 2 life sentences plus 15 years. Worst case scenario, I had to die in prison. But then you realize, you say, well, I'm not going to be the first person in the history of Cuba that gives his life for something they believe in. And once you do that reason, it's easier to resist, because I say, all right, worst case scenario, if I die here, I'm not going to be the first one to do it. Or if I have to spend, I don't know, 30 years of my life in prison, again, we have always the example of Nelson Mandela, for example. It's something that he believed in that cost so many years of his life in prison. We're not going to be the first, so we can do it. But always, all the time, you have to remember, you have to remind yourself that you were not in prison for a real crime. You just were for your ideas.
When you knew that you were going to get released, what was the first thing that you thought?
You mentioned international solidarity, and it was very important, because some people said, oh, at the end you were released because of an agreement. And that's true, but there wouldn't be any agreement if it weren't for so many years and so many efforts of people around the world and in Cuba that didn't rest to free us. When I finally realized that I would be setting free, I thought of my family in the first place. Many members of my family that I don't even knew. I was very happy to have the opportunity to come back to our country, the country that we have left almost 20 years ago. And it's even hard to explain how many feelings crossed my mind at that moment.
Probably one of the first would have been Gemma, the fact that your wife was pregnant through a very secret procedure. No one knew that she was. And you had your first child a month after you were released. Tell me, how was that possible?
It looks like a movie script, but it's not. It's the real. When I came back after 16 years in prison, and for more than 12 years they didn't let me see my wife. However, when I came back, my wife was pregnant, and 20 days after our release, we had our little child, Gemma. And people didn't know. It was a secret agreement between the 2 countries that we owe to many people of good faith, people on both sides, and to the resilience and the commitment of my wife that struggled for that. And it was a dream come true. Basically, it was an agreement between the 2 countries to let me donate my sperm in prison. And a procedure was conducted in another country. And my wife at the time had frozen her eggs, hoping that someday we will be able to procreate, and that's how it was done.
And it's not only Gemma anymore.
No, we had twins after that. Yeah.
How, I imagine the Cuba that you got back to was quite different from the one that you left. How hard was to adjust to that different country?
It was a little hard, but I always said that it was a different Cuba, but that's normal, right? The weird thing would be that we find after 20 years, we find the same Cuba. So it was hard in the sense that for many years we were living I was living in a maximum security prison with certain codes, and you speak to somebody and you keep your distance, you don't touch nobody, etc. And in minutes that changed, that somebody wants to hug you, talk to you, touch you. So psychologically it was kind of difficult. And then you start living in a country that is not exactly the country you left. There are many things that have changed for good, some all for bad, and you have to adapt. I remember, for example, I went to clean my car and paid in 3 Cuban pesos.
A different currency.
Different currency, yeah. And that's, for the people that know what I'm talking about, it was very funny, right? I didn't know. And things like that. But I would say that to good things, you adapt very quickly. And we have been receiving a lot of love from our people from the very beginning, from the very first day that we came back. Many people are showing us support and love and gratitude, and that helps a lot to adapt.
I wanted to know your perspective on the Cuba-US relations, but not the historic events that we know of. There's reluctancy even some people here in Cuba to trust the US intentions. There are reasons for that, a lot of reasons. And there's reluctancy in the US, in both sides, in the Cuban American community, in the American community, and the decision-making process. Reluctancy to deal with Cuba because of the many prejudices around our country. How do you think it's possible that, although we have so many reasons to be apart, to be in a confrontation, is it possible, not politically speaking, but culturally speaking, that our people and our countries actually get along?
I believe so. I want to believe so. One of the bigger movements in support of the Cuban Five was based in the U.S. by U.S. people. And you mentioned HEMA, and HEMA was possible because of the good faith of people in the U.S. as well as in Cuba and in other places. And that gives me hope. I know many good persons in the U.S. that would like to have a normal relation with our country. There are many paths that unite both people. There are many Cubans living in the U.S. that have nothing against their country. But on the other hand, you cannot ignore the historical conflict that you very well know. But I believe it's possible that Cuba and the U.S. finally have a good relation. And during the Obama administration, those steps that were taken were brave steps. I really hope that one day the U.S. administration will realize that we Cubans choose our own path and that we have the right to live the way we want to live. But unfortunately, now the situation is being reversed. But again, I really hope that one day the U.S., the people that take the shots in the U.S. will realize that there is no other choice than to coexist, to respect each other. We don't want to tell the U.S. how they have to do their things. They shouldn't tell us how we have to do our things here. And I really hope that someday reason will prevail in that regard.
You are now teaching and being part of the structure of people that educate our future diplomats. Why did you come here? What was the motivation?
Well, first because as soon as I came back to Cuba, I said that I would like to serve anywhere that it is considered I might be useful, right? That was my main and only goal, to serve my people anywhere that it is considered I could serve. And I was asked to come here, and I gladly accepted. This is my alma mater, and I really thank the opportunity to work with young people and to, in some ways, kind of connecting to the reality in the same way or in the same spot where I left Cuba. I was basically the same age that these people when I went to do my mission. And it's a great opportunity to be able to work with these young people that one day will represent Cuba in the foreign relations in the world. I'm teaching, but I'm also learning a lot working with the young people here.
When you study here, the young population of Cuba was in one way, and the conditions of the countries were one, which are tremendously different from now. Starting by the fact that when you studied, we had a very close relation with the USSR, which configured the world in a way which is not the way it is now. And the Cuban population, the younger people, are quite different. They're millennials, as they call it now. They're super connected. They see a growing private business in Cuba. They lived the passing away of Fidel Castro. And it's a different moment in history. When you talk to them, and I imagine they do talk to you a lot, I've seen you, how close you are to them. What are the main issues that they're worried about? What are those messages that you just can't stop giving them?
They are different, they have different codes, but they have to be different. They live in a different Cuba, they live in a different world. And at the same time, there are many points that are the same that in my times, right? That in my years. They have the same worries that I used to have about their country, about the war they live in. And I also hope that them, or at least the majority of them, have the same commitment. And I can tell you, I have had the opportunity to live with them some key moments in these times, like for example when Fidel passed away, and looking at their reactions, having been able to live so close with them, such an important moment, it gives me hope. It gave me hope of in our future, because I was able to realize their feelings. I was able to realize their commitment to the country they live in, that they might express it in a different way. And but I'm very hopeful that they will be able to keep going with our project for a better world, a better society.
Cuba is facing a lot of challenges in this year and in the coming years. We will have general elections. We will have a different president, and is facing a lot of changes in between. Would you consider, or have you thought about moving to let's say, a more political position into the Cuban government?
I always said that it's not the same to lead than to resist, right? Every time I go to the street, I receive a lot of love from our people and a lot of recognition. But that is based in the fact that I was in a mission and I resisted 16 years in U.S. prison. But again, it's not the same to resist in a cell than to lead a ministry or a province or whatever. You need preparation for that. You need experience for that. And I know there are many people in Cuba very well prepared with a long history of leading and directing different places. But again, I'm a soldier. If tomorrow I given another assignment, I will try hard to fulfill it, whatever it is.
One of the questions around the future of Cuba is how much we need to change and how much we need to keep. We have a very complex economic situation. In the current administration, Raúl Castro's administration, he's been trying to solve in the trying not to affect let's say the most vulnerable groups in Cuba, and defending the main conquests of the revolution, which are many. But that question remains, the question when we talk to our families, when we talk with our friends, and it's something that the revolutionary people should be talking about, around what's the future of the revolution. And it's on us, it's on the younger generations. You're now leading, talking, speaking, dealing with younger generations every day. You are a symbol to them, you know that. You're a modern symbol to them. You're a modern, contemporary hero to them. So your example, it's tremendously important and has a lot of influence. If you could use that influence into that future in which we need to figure out what we're going to keep and what we're going to change, what would be the main priorities that you want to transmit to those younger generations?
I would like them to realize that Fidel's and Raúl's generation have had their Moncada, had their Sierra Maestra, had their Grandma, had their Playa Girón, and we grew up admiring them for that. But our young people have to realize that they had their Sierra Maestra, and they had their Moncada, they had their Grandma. They only have to identify what it is. And it's not a task for tomorrow, it's a task for today. Because people used to say, oh, in the future, no, our future is today, their future is today. And they have to realize today and be able to identify, all right, which is my Moncada? I have to go and assault it. Which is my Grandma? I have to go and jump. And the young people today have to realize that they have the same age that Frank Pais had when he was killed. That precisely the Fidel comrades had their own age when they went to the Sierra Maestra. And many young people today, I have realized that they think that they're still not ready for that. All right, when I grew up, I do this and that. No, you are in your age now. And this country is in your hands now. And you have to take it, and you have to know what you're going to do with it. For many, many years, the enemies of the Cuban Revolution have been betting that when this moment comes, the young people won't be able to keep going with the flags of the revolution. And it is on the hand of these young people of this generation to demonstrate how wrong they were. And again, I'm very confident that that's precisely what they're going to do. Once again, to demonstrate to the empire and to the enemies of the revolution that they were wrong, that they underestimated the Cuban people.
What are you going to tell when the years pass and Gema, Gerardo, Amber ask you how they were born, how was it possible to survive, you and Adriana, your wife, so many years and through so many challenges? There are couples that can't face a month away. And what would be the story that you would make to them when they ask you?
I will tell them that they were born because of the love and the commitment of the parents, but also because of the good faith of many people and the efforts of many people and the hopes of many people around the world that we and them, I hope, will always be grateful of. And it's a story that in so many regards is political, but it's a love, more than anything else, it's a love story. And not only love between two persons, but love for this war, love for a cause, the love of many people for a better world, many people around the world, even in the US, that hope that one day we all gonna live in the better world, and do their best, give their best effort to fulfill that goal.
What are your hobbies? What do you do? How did you adjust your life from the previous one that you had to the one that you have today?
The thing I like most in a day is to wake up and spend time with my kids, my family, and with my animals and plants. I love nature, and I have so many plants and chickens and hens and dogs. That thing, there's no place that I enjoy most that my backyard, with my kids joining me there and joining me in watering the plants or feeding the animals. That's my dream day.
Thank you so much, Gerardo, for this opportunity.
Thank you very much.